Well, joining me now is, Joy John from Washington, D.C. She's a global affairs analyst at Bellcrest Institute, Washington, D.C. Joy, if you can hear me, please unmute your mic. Been signaled you have to unmute from your end so we can hear you once you start talking. Okay. So how will the Trump administration's further 15% tariff effective for 50 days or 150 days now impact global trade negotiations, especially considering the upcoming U.S. midterm elections and possible shifts in congressional power?
Yes. Olivia, when you talk to people who actually negotiate trade deals, the first thing they will tell you is that they absolutely do not like uncertainty. And that is what this creates. With the elections around the corner and Congress possibly changing hands, no one wants to lock in any big decision it is. And this ruling was a massive blow to the Trump administration. A major slap on the face of the president. And this ruling has really made it clear that even a president cannot act outside the law. I will say, I think it's safe to say that there is a quiet satisfaction in seeing fairness being upheld at a moment of intense, political theater here in Washington.
Can you briefly just explain, just very briefly, does this mean that the Supreme Court's ruling cancels the previous, tariffs, and then there's a new imposition by Trump before the 50 days?
Look, the Supreme Court is the highest court of the land. They have the final say. They have interpreted, they have gone through, reviewed this, and ruled 63 that, there is, there is no other way about it than to say that their decision is final. Will it go back to the lower courts, or will parts of the ruling go back to the lower court? That's something that we'll have to wait and see. But at this moment, their ruling on Friday was final.
Okay, so what I was asking you, Joy John, is when they rule, does that cancel the previous, tariffs, the global tariffs he imported on other countries?
Yes.
Okay. Then the Supreme Court's ruling puts $175 billion in tariff revenue at risk of refund. Now, what are the implications for U.S. importers, and how can the administration navigate litigation over refunds? I mean, it's going to be a lot.
It will be a lot, What the Supreme Court ruling is pretty straightforward. Money collected without proper legal authority cannot be kept. And for U.S. importers, I think it brings some kind of financial relief for them, especially for companies that have to absorb higher costs or pass them on to the consumers. It also removes that layer of uncertainty, and they can now plan better, knowing that the court has clarified what the administration can and cannot do. At the same time, if the Trump administration now is being forced, I would say, to handle refunds carefully. So if they choose to toe the line of courts and drag it on, that's one thing. But they will have to, people will come out for their refunds, and businesses will be watching closely to see how this will actually be implemented.
Now, Section 122 leverage is what we're going to look at now. What are the limitations and potential consequences of invoking Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974? And could this become a new precedent for future administrations?
So Section 122 allows to impose temporary. It was not meant to be long-lived, it was just only for a limited time and with specific findings there. What the Supreme Court, again, rules illustrates that Congress holds the primary power over tariffs, and any attempt whatsoever to stretch, emergency laws beyond their purpose will be checked. And this also establishes that for future presidents, they will face the same boundaries. And again, we now see that a clear legal expectation has been put out there for administrations to come. So definitely this is huge.
So how will the Supreme Court's ruling affect existing trade agreements such as the USMCA, and what renegotiations or adjustments may be necessary at this time?
Yes, the trade agreements like the USMCA will remain in effect. Partners will be watching closely. The ruling reinforces that tariffs will require legal authority, not, unilateral executive action there. So the clarity here, trade partners trust that commitment will be grounded in rules, which I think should encourage more predictable interactions going forward.
So let's raise the national security concerns here. Will the administration
Yes.
exploit, do you think Trump will exploit national security exemptions that's under Section 232 to impose tariffs, potentially sparking trade wars with allies like the EU, Canada, and the likes?
Yeah, so national security sanctions can still be applied, but broad use could create, tension with allies like Canada and the European Union. Again, the court's decision reminds everyone here that all claims must be grounded in law. They have to be legally binding rather than just based on economic policy. So I think going forward here, this approach will just serve to protect both, domestic interests and international relationships with the U.S.
So how will the U.S. tariff policies uncertainty impact emerging markets, global supply chains and commodity prices, particularly in Asia and Europe?
Sure. As we said here, uncertainty over tariffs is likely to promote positions across global markets. In Asia, for instance, exporters may, hold back shipments, and supply chains linking China, Japan, and Southeast Asia could also see disruptions here. Europe on its own faces rise in import costs, and that would, ripple through industries like the automotive and consumer goods. But commodity prices in metals to energy will remain volatile. So I think that although this really, gives companies a clearer framework, businesses will start to tread carefully in these regions.
So will Congress challenge Trump's use of executive authority for tariffs, and what legislative actions might be taken to curb or codify tariff powers? If the Supreme Court had not stepped in here, I don't know if Congress could have done anything about it, because a lot of people looked to Congress could have done something, but he's been using the executive powers.
Absolutely. That should be expected. But then again, the Republicans have the majority in the Congress. So that also plays a key role here. But trade authority belongs to the Congress. And this ruling from the highest court of the land gives the lawmakers a chance to step in and, without any kind of partisan mindset. They have to address it in the interest of the country first. I think we should be expecting hearings, sharper oversight, and potentially new clarifications on tariff powers. But I think that what is satisfying for me here to see is that the Supreme Court is acting as a referee, upholding fairness. Even when three of the justices on the bench went in and just who were on the bench were appointed by Republican presidents. It's just amazing to see, and that kind of impartiality is rare. The stage is set for Congress, and all eyes are on the Congress.
Right, absolutely. Finally, just very briefly, could the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling and subsequent tariff actions trigger the World Trade Organization disputes or retaliatory measures from trading partners? And what's at stake for global trade governance?
It's interesting you asked that, Olujay. Yes, absolutely. And that is where international dimensions come into play here. The rulebook of the WTO rests in three big principles. No nation is favored more than the other. Every WTO member must be equally treated in trade. So tariffs need, to follow agreed rules, the rules laid down. So even when the politics is tense or domestic politics is tense, wherever you are, you must follow the agreed rules. So now that the U.S. Supreme Court has done the do, I would say, or ruled, done the unthinkable really, and ruled that many of the tariffs that the Trump administration put in place lacked proper authority. I think trading partners now would stand on that as a justification to bring forth their disputes to the WTO. And that, they have the powers to review fairly, like I said, based on the three principles I mentioned to you. Even if the process is slow, because that's one setback that the WTO has. There is a slow process, but even if that process is slow, I think they will continue to set the rules for global trade, and that's where it rests on.
Right. Thank you so much, Joy John, for joining us from Washington, D.C. to talk about the further 15% from 10% global tariffs, imposed by Donald Trump. Thank you for your time.